My name is Andre Wilson, and at 72 years old, I never thought my own flesh and blood would turn against me. When I decided to sell the family farm after 50 years of back-breaking work, I expected some disappointment from my children, not violence. My daughter Jessica screamed like a banshee, while my son Thomas cracked my ribs with a single shove. But 20 minutes later, they both learned a lesson about respect they would never forget. If you are watching this, let me know where you are from and subscribe to hear what happened next. I purchased this 200-acre farm back in 1973 when land in rural Pennsylvania was still affordable for a young man with dreams. I was just 22 then, full of ambition and naive enough to think that working the land would be romantic. The reality hit me during that first brutal winter when pipes froze, equipment failed, and I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But I persevered. Year after year, I worked that land until my hands became permanently calloused and my back developed a permanent curve. I planted corn in the south fields, wheat in the north, and raised livestock in between. The smell of fresh soil in spring became my perfume, and the sound of combines in autumn became my symphony. This wasn't just land to me. It was my identity, my purpose, my entire world. Martha came into my life in '75. She was the daughter of a neighboring farmer, with fiery red hair and a smile that could melt winter snow. We married that same year, and she became my partner in everything. She kept the books, managed the house, and still found time to bring me lunch in the fields every day without fail. We raised our 3 children in the farmhouse that was built in 1882. Thomas, our first, was born in 1980. Jessica followed 5 years later, and our youngest, Jonathan, came along in 1987. Martha loved this place as much as I did. She planted the rose garden by the front porch and the apple orchard behind the barn. Every corner of this farm holds a memory of her, which made it all the harder when cancer took her 3 years ago. The doctors gave her 6 months, but my Martha was stubborn. She held on for almost 2 years, still trying to manage the farm finances from her hospital bed right up until the end. After she passed, the farm felt empty. The work remained the same, but the purpose behind it diminished. I found myself wandering through the house at night, looking for someone who would never return. The arthritis in my hands grew worse, and my back problems made it nearly impossible to handle the physical demands. I hired help, but good farmhands are expensive these days, and the profit margins in farming have become razor thin. Modern agriculture has changed dramatically since I started. Small family farms like mine have been squeezed by massive corporate operations and foreign competition. Equipment costs have skyrocketed. A new combine costs more than my entire farm did when I bought it. Environmental regulations, while necessary, added more costs and paperwork. The drought 2 years ago nearly bankrupted me, and the flooding last spring destroyed half my wheat crop. So when Heartland Agricultural Corporation approached me with an offer of $4 million for the property, I listened. They wanted to expand their operations in the region, and my land was perfectly situated. At first, I refused outright. How could I sell Martha's roses and our family home? But as winter approached and my body ached more with each passing day, I reconsidered. I spent months agonizing over the decision. I prayed for guidance and sought advice from my oldest friends. In the end, it came down to practicality. I was 72, alone, and struggling to maintain the operation. The farm would eventually have to be sold anyway when I could no longer work it. Better to sell on my terms than be forced to liquidate in desperation. With the money, I could finally retire properly. I had always promised Martha we would buy a small place in Florida where she could garden year-round without the harsh Pennsylvania winters. She never got to see that dream realized, but I could honor her memory by finally making that move. I also wanted to make a significant donation to the Veterans Hospital that had treated so many of my Vietnam War buddies over the years. And maybe, just maybe, I could finally travel beyond the borders of Pennsylvania and see some of this world before my time was up. I called my 3 children to the farm one Sunday in April to tell them my decision. Thomas arrived first, driving his shiny BMW and wearing a suit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. He had left the farm at 18, declaring farm work beneath him, and built a moderately successful insurance agency in Philadelphia. Jessica came next, already looking irritated that she had to drive 2 hours from her suburban home. She had been married and divorced 3 times, each husband seemingly wealthier but less patient than the last. Jonathan arrived last, in his worn pickup truck, apologizing for his lateness. He had become a high school agriculture teacher, the only one of my children who maintained any connection to farming, though he had chosen to teach rather than work the land himself. I told them simply and directly over coffee at our old kitchen table. I was selling the farm and retiring to Florida. Thomas nodded analytically, immediately asking about the sale price. Jessica seemed distracted, checking her phone repeatedly. Jonathan sat in silence, his eyes moving around the kitchen as if memorizing every detail before it disappeared. None of them protested outright, but I sensed something in their reactions that troubled me. A hint of calculation in Thomas's eyes, a sudden focus from Jessica when I mentioned the amount, and a resigned sadness from Jonathan that broke my heart a little. Little did I know that this simple announcement would set in motion a chain of events that would tear our family apart. In the weeks that followed my announcement, Jessica began appearing at the farm more frequently than she had in years. Before the sale news, she typically visited only on holidays and occasional Sundays, usually staying for the minimum polite duration before finding an excuse to leave. Now, suddenly, she was dropping by unannounced several times a week, often with her 2 children, Sam and Lily, in tow. At first, I was pleased by her renewed interest in spending time with me. I had always tried to maintain a close relationship with Jessica, despite her increasingly chaotic life choices. She brought homemade meals, though I strongly suspected they were purchased from local dailies and repackaged. She asked detailed questions about my health, my plans, and my needs for the future. It felt like the daughter I remembered from before her first disastrous marriage had returned. But gradually, the true motivation for her visits became clear. She began casually dropping mentions of her financial struggles into our conversations. Her newest car needed expensive repairs. Her mortgage payment had increased. Her ex-husband was late with child support again. Each problem was presented not as a request for help, but as a subtle reminder of her difficulties. Jessica had always been financially irresponsible. Her first husband, a promising young lawyer, had provided well for her until he discovered her secret credit card debt of over $50,000. The second marriage to a real estate developer ended when his business collapsed during the housing crisis, and Jessica found herself unable to adjust to a reduced lifestyle. Her third and final marriage to a restaurant owner lasted barely 18 months before he filed for divorce, citing her excessive spending as a primary reason. Now she was struggling as a single mother, with a modest child support arrangement and a part-time job as a boutique sales associate that seemed designed more to give her employee discounts than actual income. Her house, a 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale neighborhood, was far beyond what she could realistically afford on her income. Our first real argument came about 6 weeks after my announcement of the farm sale. We were sitting on the porch, watching her children play in the yard, when she casually mentioned her plans for her share of the farm money. "I need to redo the kitchen before winter, Dad," she said, sipping the iced tea I had made. "Nothing fancy, just new countertops and appliances. I figured I could use part of my share for that and save the rest for the kids' college funds." Her share, as if the proceeds from selling my life's work were a communal resource to be divided. I set my glass down carefully, trying to control my reaction. "Jessica, there is no share," I said quietly. "This is my farm, and the money from the sale is mine. I have plans for it." She looked genuinely confused, as if the concept of me controlling my own money was foreign to her. "But Dad, it is family property. We all grew up here. Mom would have wanted us to benefit from it." Bringing Martha into it was a low blow, and Jessica knew it. But she had miscalculated badly if she thought invoking her mother would sway me toward financial irresponsibility. "Your mother and I discussed our plans for retirement many times," I replied evenly. "She would have wanted me to be secure in my final years, not watching from Florida as you renovate a kitchen you cannot afford in a house that is draining you dry." Jessica's face hardened, the pleasant mask slipping. "That's not fair. I have needs. The kids have needs. After everything I have been through, I deserve some security." I offered a compromise. I would help her refinance her mortgage to something more manageable and pay off her car loan. But I would not be handing over hundreds of thousands of dollars that would inevitably disappear into her financial black hole. She left angry that day, and each subsequent visit became more strained. She began bringing the grandchildren more often, clearly using them as emotional leverage. Sam would mention how his baseball team needed new uniforms, while Lily would talk about the dance classes her friends were taking that Jessica could not afford. It was manipulation, pure and simple, and it broke my heart to see my grandchildren being used as pawns. As the closing date for the farm sale approached, Jessica's financial situation apparently grew more desperate. She confided, with what I suspected were crocodile tears, that her mortgage company had begun foreclosure proceedings. She needed $80,000 to bring the loan current and avoid losing the house. When I suggested she sell the house and find something within her means, she erupted in anger. "You want your grandchildren living in some tiny apartment? Is that what you want? After all those years of you working and mom sacrificing, you are going to let us struggle while you live it up in Florida?" I remained firm. I would help her find a financial advisor, and I would ensure my grandchildren had educational opportunities. But I would not throw good money after bad into her financial mismanagement. That night, after she left, I received a text message from Thomas asking me to call him about Jessica's situation. I realized then that she had already begun recruiting allies for her cause. The battle lines were being drawn, and I found myself preparing for a conflict I never wanted with my own children. Thomas had always been the ambitious one in the family. Even as a boy, he would count his allowance carefully and negotiate for more chores if it meant more money. He left for college, with barely a backward glance at the farm, majoring in business and immediately moving to Philadelphia after graduation. He started his insurance agency from scratch, building a decent business through relentless networking and salesmanship. When I called him the day after Jessica's visit, his tone was professionally neutral. He had perfected that insurance agent voice that conveyed both concern and authority. "Dad, Jessica called me pretty upset," he began. "She says you are refusing to help her with her house situation." I explained my position carefully, knowing Thomas would analyze every word. I told him about Jessica's pattern of financial irresponsibility and my concerns about enabling further poor decisions. "I understand your perspective," he said in that measured tone. "But this is family, Dad. $4 million is a significant sum. Surely there is room to help Jessica and still fund your retirement comfortably." I noted the shift in his approach when he mentioned the sale price. Before knowing the exact amount, Thomas had shown little interest in the farm sale beyond perfunctory questions. Now there was a new intensity to his involvement. "What are your plans for the money exactly?" he asked, as if he were reviewing a client's financial portfolio. I outlined my intentions: the house in Florida, the Veterans Hospital donation, setting up education funds for all my grandchildren, and keeping a healthy reserve for my medical needs as I aged. His response was telling. "That seems unnecessarily conservative. With proper investment, that money could work harder for all of us. I have some excellent clients in wealth management who could show you options that would benefit the entire family." All of us. The entire family. Thomas was now clearly positioning himself alongside Jessica and viewing my farm proceeds as a family asset rather than my personal property. "I appreciate the suggestion, Thomas," I said firmly, "but I have already engaged a financial advisor recommended by my attorney." The conversation ended cordially enough, but within days, I began receiving calls and texts from Thomas with increasing frequency. He sent me articles about family wealth management and the importance of legacy planning. He forwarded contact information for estate planners and tax specialists who could help minimize gift taxes if I decided to share substantial sums with my children. 2 weeks later, Thomas and his wife Laura made a rare visit to the farm. Laura had always made it clear that rural Pennsylvania was not her preferred destination. She arrived wearing designer sunglasses and impractical shoes that sank into the gravel driveway, looking around with barely disguised disdain. Over dinner, Thomas casually mentioned that his insurance agency was facing some challenges. A few major clients had moved to competitors, and the commercial property market was in flux. "Nothing serious," he assured me, "just a temporary cash flow issue that had him considering taking out a business loan." Laura interjected. "I told Thomas he should just talk to you first. Family support is always better than bank interest rates." She smiled thinly, her eyes calculating behind her perfect makeup. I realized then that Thomas's financial situation might be more precarious than he had let on. Later research would confirm my suspicions. He had overleveraged his agency during the recent economic boom, taking on expensive office space and staff he could not sustain when the market cooled. Additionally, Thomas had developed a gambling habit during business trips to Atlantic City, losses he concealed from both his wife and his financial statements. What started as Thomas supposedly mediating between Jessica and me quickly evolved into him joining forces with her against me. They began arriving together for these financial discussions, presenting a united front of adult children concerned about their father's decision-making. In reality, they were two financially desperate individuals eyeing what they increasingly viewed as their inheritance. The confrontational meeting that would mark the turning point came 3 days before the scheduled closing on the farm sale. Thomas, Jessica, and Laura arrived unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. They sat across from me at the kitchen table where our family had shared thousands of meals, now looking more like prosecutors than children. "Dad, we need to discuss the farm proceeds and come to an arrangement that works for everyone," Thomas began in his business voice. For 2 hours, they presented their case. Thomas had created spreadsheets showing how the money could be divided and invested. Jessica had prepared a list of her immediate financial needs. Laura occasionally interjected with comments about family legacy and responsibility. I listened patiently, then responded with a single question. "Did any of you work this farm for the past 50 years? The silence that followed was telling. Thomas had spent exactly 1 summer helping on the farm after high school before declaring it beneath him. Jessica had never shown any interest in agricultural work. Only Jonathan, who was conspicuously absent from this meeting, had ever truly appreciated the land. "This farm represents my life's work," I said quietly. "The money from its sale represents my retirement security and my final opportunity to fulfill promises I made to your mother. I will help where I can, but I will not jeopardize my future to solve financial problems that you created for yourselves." Thomas's face flushed with anger. Laura placed a restraining hand on his arm, but her eyes were cold. Jessica began to cry, accusations of selfishness and cruelty spilling from her lips between sobs. They left without resolution, but I could feel the hostility building. What had begun as manipulation was evolving into something more dangerous. Desperation mixed with entitlement. The worst combination I could imagine. And I knew, with a heavy heart, that the final confrontation was yet to come. The day of the farm sale closing dawned clear and warm. I dressed in my best suit, the one I had worn to Martha's funeral, and drove myself to First National Bank in town where the proceedings would take place. My attorney, James Wilson, no relation despite the shared surname, met me in the lobby. James had been handling my legal affairs for 30 years and had become a trusted friend in the process. The closing went smoothly. Representatives from Heartland Agricultural Corporation were professional and efficient. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, and by 11:30 that morning, I was officially no longer a farmer. The funds would be transferred to my accounts by the end of business day. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for the end of an era, relief that the process was complete, and anxiety about the next chapter of my life. James invited me to lunch to celebrate, but I declined. I needed some time alone to process the morning's events. I drove back to the farmhouse, which I would still occupy for another 30 days according to our agreement, and changed into more comfortable clothes. I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, looking out over the fields that had defined my existence for so long but were no longer mine. The sound of tires on gravel alerted me to visitors around 3 in the afternoon. I recognized Thomas's BMW and Jessica's SUV pulling up in tandem. They had coordinated their arrival, which immediately put me on guard. Neither had congratulated me on completing the sale, though both had been aware of the closing date. They approached the porch with determined expressions. Jessica looked agitated, her movements jerky and her makeup hastily applied. Thomas appeared outwardly calm, but I could see the tension in his jaw. and the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching at his sides. "Is it done?" Jessica asked without preamble. "Did you get the money?" "Hello to you too, Jessica," I replied evenly. "Yes, the closing is complete. The funds will be transferred today." They exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them that heightened my unease. "Let us go inside and talk," Thomas suggested in a tone that was more demand than request. We moved into the living room where so many family Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations had taken place. The familiar setting made what followed all the more painful. "Dad, we know you have your plans," Jessica began, her voice artificially sweet. "But Thomas and I have been discussing things, and we really believe that a significant portion of the farm proceeds should come to us now, not later." "I have been clear about my intentions," I replied calmly. "I am not changing my mind." Thomas stepped forward, physically inserting himself into the conversation. $4 million, Dad. $4 million. And you are seriously going to hoard it all for yourself when your children have real needs? "I am going to use it responsibly," I corrected him, "including setting up trusts for my grandchildren's education." "Trusts?" Jessica spat the word like it was poison. "So you do not trust us to handle money for our own kids?" "Your financial history speaks for itself," I said, my patience beginning to fray. This triggered Jessica's first outburst. She jumped to her feet, her voice rising to a shout. "That is so unfair. You have no idea what it is like trying to raise children today. Everything costs so much more than when you were young. I have worked this farm through droughts, floods, and economic downturns," I reminded her. "I understand financial hardship better than you ever will." Thomas moved closer to my chair, using his height to physically intimidate me. "Jessica is right. You are being unreasonable and selfish. Mom would be ashamed of how you are treating us." The mention of Martha again, weaponized against me, ignited my own anger. "Do not presume to tell me what your mother would think," I said, rising from my chair to face him. "She watched you both abandon this farm without a second thought. She saw how you visited less and less frequently once you had your own lives. She would understand exactly why I am protecting this money from being wasted." Jessica's composure shattered completely. She began screaming, her face contorted with rage. "You owe us this money. We are your children. We have rights to that farm too." "You have rights to nothing," I responded firmly. "You did not earn this money. You did not work for it. You did not sacrifice for it." Thomas took another step toward me, now standing uncomfortably close. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You think you are so righteous, Dad. The noble farmer who sacrificed everything. But we know the truth. You were just too stubborn to sell years ago when Mom was still alive. She could have enjoyed retirement if you had not been so obsessed with this worthless piece of land." That accusation hit me like a physical blow. Martha and I had discussed selling several times during her illness, but had ultimately decided together that the time was not right. To suggest I had denied her comfort in her final years was beyond cruel. "Get out of my house," I demanded, my voice shaking with emotion. Thomas did not move. Instead, he jabbed a finger into my chest. "You are going to transfer $1 million to each of us, or we will contest the sale. We will claim you are mentally incompetent. We will tie that money up in court for years." I pushed his hand away. "That is enough. I am not giving in to blackmail from my own children. Now leave before I call the police." What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to react. Thomas shoved me hard, sending me stumbling backward into the stone fireplace that dominated the living room wall. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs and sent a searing pain through my left side. I heard a distinct crack as my ribs gave way, followed by the thud of my body hitting the floor. The pain was immediate and intense, radiating from my side with each labored breath. I looked up to see Thomas standing over me, momentarily shocked by his own actions. Jessica stood frozen in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, but neither moved to help me. Instead, Jessica resumed her verbal assault. "Now look what you made him do. This is your fault for being so stubborn." Thomas quickly regained his composure, his momentary remorse replaced by cold calculation. "If you would just be reasonable, none of this would be happening. Sign over the money, Dad. $1 million each. That is fair." I clutched my side, struggling to breathe through the pain. "Get out," I gasped. "Get out now." "Fine," Thomas said, his voice eerily calm. "But this is not over. We will be back with lawyers. Jessica, let us go." As they turned to leave, I heard a knock at the front door, followed by the concerned voice of my neighbor, Frank Miller. "Andre, everything okay in there?" I heard shouting. Thomas and Jessica exchanged alarmed glances before Jessica called out in a suddenly normal voice, "Everything is fine, Mr. Miller. Just a family discussion." But Frank, who had been my neighbor for 40 years, was not so easily dissuaded. He tried the door, finding it unlocked, and pushed it open. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Me on the floor clutching my side, Thomas and Jessica standing over me with flushed, angry faces. "What the hell happened here?" Frank demanded. "Nothing," Thomas said quickly. "Dad fell. We were just helping him up." Frank looked at me questioningly, and I shook my head. "Call an ambulance, Frank," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "And the police." Thomas's face drained of color. Jessica began to protest, but Frank was already pulling out his cell phone. Thomas grabbed Jessica's arm and pulled her toward the door. "We will be in touch, Dad," he said, his tone now threatening. "Think carefully about your next move." As they fled to their vehicles, I heard Jessica's parting shot. "This is not over. That money is partly ours, and we will get it." Frank knelt beside me, his weathered farmer's face creased with concern. "Jesus, Andre, did your boy do this to you?" I nodded, each breath sending fresh waves of pain through my body. Thomas pushed me. "I think my ribs are broken." As the sound of sirens approached in the distance, I reflected on how quickly family ties could unravel when money entered the equation. But what Thomas and Jessica did not know was that I had been preparing for this possibility for months, and their actions today had just sealed their fate. The ambulance arrived within 15 minutes, followed closely by a police cruiser. The paramedics confirmed what I already suspected: multiple fractured ribs on my left side. They carefully loaded me onto a stretcher, while Officer Dave Grantham, whom I had known since he was a boy, took preliminary notes about the incident. "I will need a formal statement later, Mr. Wilson," he said as they prepared to transport me. "But can you tell me briefly what happened here?" "My son Thomas pushed me into the fireplace during an argument about money," I said simply. "My daughter Jessica was present and did nothing to help afterward. I want to press charges." Dave looked shocked. He had gone to school with Thomas, though they had never been close. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Wilson? Family matters can be complicated." "I am absolutely certain," I replied, wincing as the paramedics lifted the stretcher. "And Dave, there is something else you should know. I have security cameras installed in the house. Everything is recorded." His eyebrows shot up, but he nodded professionally. "We will need that footage as evidence, sir." The drive to County General Hospital took 20 minutes, during which I focused on breathing shallowly to minimize the pain. In the emergency room, X-rays confirmed 3 cracked ribs on my left side. Fortunately, there was no lung puncture or other internal damage. The doctor, a young woman named Dr. Patel, prescribed pain medication and recommended rest. "Unfortunately, rib fractures cannot be cast or surgically repaired in most cases," she explained. "They simply need time to heal on their own, usually 6 to 8 weeks. You will need help at home during your recovery." "My youngest son will assist me," I assured her, though I had not yet spoken to Jonathan about the incident. I knew in my heart that he would step up, unlike his siblings. As I lay in the hospital bed waiting for my discharge paperwork, my thoughts drifted back to a conversation I had with James Wilson, my attorney, 6 months earlier when I first began considering selling the farm. "You should prepare for family conflict, Andre," he had advised me. "I have seen too many families torn apart over inheritances and property sales. Your children might have expectations about the proceeds." I had scoffed initially. "My kids are not like that," I told him. "They have their own lives, their own careers." James had given me a knowing look honed by decades of legal practice. "Money changes people, Andre, even good people, especially when large sums are involved. Trust me on this." At his recommendation, I had taken several precautionary measures. First, I updated my will to clearly outline my intentions for the farm proceeds. Second, I transferred a portion of my existing savings to a separate account that would remain untouched by the farm transaction, ensuring I had emergency funds regardless of what happened with the sale. Third, and most crucially, I installed a modern security system throughout the farmhouse, including video cameras with audio recording capability in all common areas. The cameras were discreet, hidden in light fixtures, bookshelves, and wall decor. A professional security company had installed them, ensuring they were legally compliant and properly positioned. The system uploaded footage continuously to a secure cloud server that only I and the security company could access. I had felt somewhat foolish taking these precautions against my own children, but James had seen too many family disputes turn ugly to leave me unprotected. His foresight had proved invaluable. After being discharged from the hospital with prescription painkillers and strict instructions to rest, Frank Miller drove me home. As we approached the farmhouse, I noticed with alarm that Thomas's BMW was parked in the driveway again. "Want me to call the police?" Frank asked, reaching for his phone. "Not yet," I replied. "Let me see what they are doing first." Frank helped me from the car and stayed close as we approached the house. Through the front window, I could see Thomas and Jessica in the living room. Thomas appeared to be examining the fireplace where he had pushed me, while Jessica was kneeling by my old roll-top desk, trying various keys in the lock. They were looking for the sale documents, I realized, or perhaps searching for my financial records. Either way, they had returned to my home uninvited while I was in the hospital, adding breaking and entering to assault. I pulled out my cell phone and opened the security system app. A quick glance confirmed that the cameras were recording their illegal entry and search. I then made a call, not to the local police, but to a private number James had given me for emergencies. Frank looked at me questioningly. I mouthed the word "wait," and we stood watching from a distance as, within minutes, 2 police cruisers arrived silently, without sirens. Officer Grantham and 3 other officers approached the house from different angles. What happened next unfolded like a scene from a crime drama. The officers entered the house simultaneously through different doors, catching Thomas and Jessica completely by surprise. Their protests about visiting their injured father died quickly when Officer Grantham informed them that I was standing outside and had not given them permission to enter my home. I walked in slowly, supported by Frank, to find my 2 eldest children being handcuffed in my living room. "Dad, this is insane," Thomas protested, his face pale with shock. "We were just checking on your house while you were in the hospital." Officer Grantham looked at me. "Mr. Wilson, can you confirm these individuals did not have permission to enter your residence?" "They absolutely did not," I stated firmly. "And I want to know what they were searching for." Jessica began to cry, but her tears no longer moved me. "This is a misunderstanding," she sobbed. "We were worried about you after your fall. After your brother pushed me, I corrected her. And it appears you were more worried about finding my financial documents than my well-being." Thomas stared at me with narrowed eyes. "You cannot prove anything. It will be your word against ours." That is when I revealed my final precaution. "Actually, I can prove everything," I said calmly. "Officer Grantham, please look up at the bookshelf corner, the light fixture over the desk, and the wall clock. You will find cameras that have recorded everything that happened here today and during your previous visit." The blood drained from Thomas's face. Jessica's sobs stopped abruptly as she processed what I had said. "The recording system captured your assault," I continued, addressing Thomas directly. "It recorded your threats about contesting the sale and claiming I am mentally incompetent. It documented Jessica's verbal abuse while I lay injured. And now, it has captured your illegal entry into my home." "You were spying on us?" Jessica gasped, outrage replacing her artificial tears. "I was protecting myself," I corrected her, on advice of counsel, and thank God I did. Officer Grantham was already examining one of the discrete cameras. "This is an impressive setup, Mr. Wilson. We will need access to the footage for evidence." "My attorney has all the access codes," I assured him. "He will provide whatever you need." As the officers prepared to take Thomas and Jessica to the station, I felt no satisfaction, only a profound sadness. These were my children, whom I had raised, loved, and sacrificed for. Now they were being led away in handcuffs from the house where they had grown up, having betrayed every value Martha and I had tried to instill in them. "Dad, you cannot do this," Thomas said, his voice now pleading rather than threatening. "We are family. Family does not assault family over money," I replied quietly. "Family does not threaten and manipulate for financial gain. You both made your choices, and now you will face the consequences." As they were escorted to the police cruisers, I saw the dawning realization in their eyes, not just of the legal trouble they were in, but of what they had lost that could never be replaced: my trust. In pursuing a portion of my wealth, they had sacrificed something far more valuable, and no amount of money could buy it back. The days following the arrest of Thomas and Jessica were a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and painful recovery. My ribs throbbed with each breath, a constant physical reminder of the betrayal that had fractured our family as surely as Thomas's shove had fractured my bones. James Wilson, my attorney, arrived the morning after the incident with a grim expression. The security footage had been downloaded and preserved as evidence. He played portions of it for me in my living room, the same room where the assault had occurred. "This is clear-cut, Andre," he said as we watched Thomas shoving me into the fireplace. "The audio captures the threats beforehand and their failure to render aid afterward. The breaking and entering is also well documented. The district attorney will likely charge Thomas with assault and Jessica as an accessory. The illegal entry will add additional charges." I watched the footage with a strange detachment, as if observing strangers rather than my own children. The coldness in Thomas's eyes as he stood over my fallen body. The calculating look on Jessica's face as she continued berating me instead of helping. These were not the children I thought I knew. "You do not have to proceed with charges," James reminded me gently. "This could still be handled as a family matter." But I knew there was no going back. The trust was irreparably broken, and without consequences, Thomas and Jessica would simply try different tactics to get what they wanted. "I want to press full charges," I confirmed, "and I want restraining orders against both of them." James nodded soberly. "I will handle everything." Later that afternoon, I received a call from Jonathan, my youngest son. His voice was tight with emotion. "Dad, I just heard. The school secretary told me police arrested Thomas and Jessica at the farm. What happened?" I explained the situation as calmly as I could, though my voice broke several times during the retelling. Jonathan listened in stunned silence. "I will be there tomorrow morning," he said when I finished. "You should not be alone right now, and you will need help with those ribs." True to his word, Jonathan arrived early the next day, his pickup truck loaded with his suitcases and a cooler of prepared meals made by his wife, Diane. He helped me settle into a comfortable recliner and immediately took charge of managing the household, fielding phone calls, and coordinating with James about the legal proceedings. "I cannot believe they would do this to you," he said as he brought me a cup of coffee. "Over money, of all things, as if you had not given us enough already." The contrast between Jonathan's behavior and that of his siblings was stark. While Thomas and Jessica had seen the farm as a source of potential wealth, Jonathan saw it as our family heritage. He had never asked for anything from the sale proceeds, though I had already decided to help him and Diane with a down payment on a house closer to their school. The initial court hearing was scheduled for the following week. Thomas hired an expensive criminal defense attorney from Philadelphia, while Jessica was appointed a public defender after claiming she could not afford representation. I attended despite my painful ribs, supported by Jonathan and James. The security footage was damning. Thomas's attorney attempted to characterize the shove as a momentary loss of control rather than an intentional assault, but the judge was unmoved, particularly after hearing the threats that preceded and followed the physical violence. Jessica's attorney tried to minimize her role, portraying her as merely present rather than an active participant. But her verbal abuse and failure to seek medical assistance for me were clearly visible in the recording. Both were released on bail with restraining orders prohibiting them from coming within 500 feet of me or my residence. Thomas was charged with assault, breaking and entering, and attempted theft. Jessica faced charges of accessory to assault, breaking and entering, and attempted theft. Trial dates were set for 3 months later. The news spread quickly through our small rural community. Neighbors who had known our family for decades expressed their shock and support. Frank Miller and his wife brought dinner every evening for the first week. My church pastor visited regularly to pray with me and offer counsel on forgiveness, though I was not yet ready to discuss that challenging concept. As the legal process unfolded, additional troubling information came to light. The investigation into Thomas's finances revealed that his insurance agency was on the verge of collapse. He had misrepresented the company's financial health to investors and taken out high-interest loans to cover mounting gambling debts. The state insurance commissioner launched a separate investigation into potential fraud related to client premiums. Jessica's situation proved equally concerning. Her children, Sam and Lily, had been frequently absent from school during her increasingly desperate attempts to secure money from me. Teachers reported that the children often came to school hungry and in unwashed clothes. Their father, Jessica's second ex-husband, filed for emergency custody based on these reports, supported by evidence of her arrest and increasingly erratic behavior. The revelation that hit me hardest came from Jonathan, who reluctantly shared what Thomas had told him during a heated phone call. He said they had been planning this for months. "Dad," Jonathan explained, unable to meet my eyes. "After you announced the sale, Thomas and Jessica made a pact to get as much money as possible from you. They thought if they pressured you enough, you would give in to keep the peace. Their planning made the betrayal even more painful. This had not been a spontaneous reaction to disappointment, but a calculated campaign to manipulate and intimidate me into surrendering my financial security." As the trial date approached, both Thomas and Jessica made attempts at reconciliation, clearly hoping I would drop the charges. Thomas sent a formal letter of apology through his attorney, expressing regret for the unfortunate physical altercation and suggesting family counseling. Jessica left tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness and claiming she had not understood the seriousness of the situation. I did not respond to either overture. The time for manipulation had passed. Actions would have consequences, a lesson I had tried to teach them as children but had apparently failed to instill. The district attorney, seeing the strength of the evidence, offered plea deals to both. Thomas eventually accepted, pleading guilty to assault and breaking and entering in exchange for the attempted theft charge being dropped. He received a suspended sentence of 1 year, 2 years probation, and 200 hours of community service. Additionally, he was required to attend anger management classes and financial counseling. Jessica also accepted a plea deal, receiving probation and community service. Her cooperation against Thomas, including testimony about their planning, worked in her favor with the prosecutor, but the legal consequences were only part of the fallout. Thomas's insurance license was suspended pending the fraud investigation, effectively ending his career in that industry. His wife Laura filed for separation after learning the extent of his gambling losses and deception. Jessica lost custody of her children to their father, with visitation rights contingent on her completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluation. Most painfully for them, I believe, was the social consequences in our community. The family that had once been respected for generations was now the subject of gossip and judgment. The Wilson name, which had stood for integrity and hard work, was tarnished by their actions. Through all of this, Jonathan remained my steadfast support. He took a leave of absence from teaching to help me through my recovery and the legal proceedings. His quiet strength reminded me so much of Martha that sometimes it brought tears to my eyes. "When will you tell them about the trust funds?" Jonathan asked me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over fields that were no longer mine, but would always be part of me. "When the time is right," I replied. "When they have truly learned that relationships matter more than money." That lesson has come at a terrible price for all of us. Physical healing came slowly. For 6 weeks, each breath reminded me of that violent moment when family bonds shattered against the stone fireplace. Jonathan stayed through most of my recovery, returning to teaching only when I could manage daily activities without assistance. His wife Diane visited on weekends, bringing homemade bread and the warm presence of someone who understood family loyalty. As summer turned to fall, I began making decisions about my future. The farm sale proceeds had been securely invested according to the plan James and I had developed. I purchased a modest 3-bedroom home in a retirement community in Central Florida, close enough to the ocean to smell the salt air on breezy days. The house had a small garden where I could grow tomatoes and peppers year-round, a hobby Martha had always encouraged me to develop in retirement. Before leaving Pennsylvania, I made another significant decision. I established trust funds for all 5 of my grandchildren, including Thomas's son Michael and daughter Anna, as well as Jessica's Sam and Lily. Each trust contained $200,000 that would become accessible when they turned 25, with provisions for educational expenses before that age. The trusts were structured so that neither Thomas nor Jessica could access or control the funds. Additionally, I created a scholarship fund for agricultural students at the local community college, dedicating it to Martha's memory. The Martha Wilson Agricultural Scholarship would provide 5 full scholarships annually to students pursuing careers in sustainable farming. It felt like the right way to honor both her memory and the land we had loved. The move to Florida in October was bittersweet. Jonathan and Diane helped me pack only what mattered most: family photographs, Martha's quilts, my grandfather's rocking chair. The rest was either sold or donated. Leaving the farmhouse for the final time, I stood in each room, saying goodbye to the walls that had witnessed 50 years of my life. The retirement community proved to be a better fit than I had anticipated. My neighbors were mostly other retired professionals and farmers, people who understood the value of hard work and simple pleasures. I joined a veterans coffee group that met 3 times weekly, finding camaraderie with men who shared similar experiences and values. I even reluctantly joined the community gardening club at the insistence of Eleanor Jenkins, a spirited widow who lived 2 doors down and seemed determined to draw me out of my shell. 3 months after my move, I received an unexpected letter from Jessica. Unlike her previous communications, which had been filled with excuses and emotional manipulation, this one seemed genuinely reflective. She had completed a court-mandated counseling program and was working with a therapist on her financial behaviors and parenting skills. The counselor says I have been using shopping and financial chaos as ways to avoid dealing with deeper issues, she wrote. I never processed Mom's death properly. I kept trying to fill the emptiness with things and status symbols. I know this does not excuse what happened, but I am truly trying to understand why I acted as I did. She closed the letter by acknowledging that she had violated my trust in a way that might never be fully repaired, but hoped that someday I might be willing to have a relationship with her again, even if it was different from before. I did not respond immediately. Trust, once broken, could not be mended with a single letter, no matter how sincere. But I tucked the letter into my desk drawer rather than discarding it, leaving the door open a crack for possible future reconciliation. Thomas, in contrast, maintained his distance. Jonathan reported that Thomas had moved to New Jersey after his marriage collapsed, starting over with a job in commercial real estate. He had made no attempts to contact me directly, though he had asked Jonathan several pointed questions about my will and whether I had disinherited him. Some lessons, it seemed, were harder to learn than others. Jonathan and Diane visited for Thanksgiving, bringing news that they had used the money I had given them to purchase a small house near their school. Diane was expecting their first child in spring, news that filled me with a bittersweet joy. Martha should have been here to welcome her first grandchild from our youngest son. Life settled into new patterns. I found unexpected pleasure in Florida's gentle winters, in growing vegetables year-round, and in the simple rhythms of retirement community life. Eleanor from the gardening club became a regular companion for movies and community events, her no-nonsense attitude and quick wit reminding me of Martha in ways that brought comfort rather than pain. 6 months after moving to Florida, I received a call from the attorney handling Jessica's custody case. Her ex-husband had agreed to allow her more visitation time with Sam and Lily, as she had consistently attended parenting classes and therapy. The children had asked to visit me in Florida, and both parents wanted to know if I would be amenable. I agreed to a visit during their spring break. When they arrived, accompanied by their father rather than Jessica, I was shocked by how much they had grown. Sam, now 13, was nearly as tall as me. Lily, at 11, showed hints of the woman she would become, with Martha's red hair and curious eyes. They were initially cautious around me, uncertain where they stood after the family fracture. But children are remarkably resilient and forgiving. By the second day, Sam was helping me in the garden, while Lily sat on the porch with a sketch pad, drawing the Florida birds that visited my feeders. Their father, David, kept a respectful distance, allowing us to rebuild our relationship on our own terms. The night before they left, Sam asked the question I had been expecting. "Grandpa, why did Mom and Uncle Thomas get so crazy about your money?" I considered how to answer truthfully while respecting that these were still his mother and his uncle. "Money does strange things to people sometimes, Sam. It can make them forget what really matters." "Are you still mad at them?" Lily asked, her eyes serious. "I am sad about what happened," I told her honestly. "Trust is like a beautiful vase. Once it breaks, you can glue it back together, but the cracks will always show. That does not mean you stop loving the vase. It just means you are more careful with it." After they left, I wrote a letter to Jessica, our first direct communication since the court hearings. I told her about Sam's talent for gardening and Lily's artistic eye. I did not offer forgiveness exactly, but I opened a door for carefully bounded communication about her children. It was a start. By the 1-year anniversary of the assault, my ribs had fully healed, though I still felt occasional twinges in damp weather. The physical pain had faded, but the emotional lessons remained sharp and clear. I had learned that money truly does reveal character rather than building it. Thomas and Jessica had shown who they truly were when tested, just as Jonathan had. I had learned that preparation and caution are not signs of distrust, but of wisdom, especially as one ages. James's insistence on security measures had protected me in ways I could never have anticipated. Most importantly, I had learned that family is defined not by blood alone, but by actions, respect, and mutual care. My family circle had changed. It now included Jonathan, Diane, and their expected child. It included Sam and Lily during their visits. It included Eleanor from the gardening club and the veterans I met with for coffee. It even included Frank Miller, my former neighbor who still called weekly to check on me. Thomas might someday find his way back through genuine remorse and changed behavior. Jessica was taking small steps in that direction already. The door remained open, but with stronger locks and clearer boundaries. As I sat on my Florida porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors Martha would have loved, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since the confrontation. Life had not turned out as I expected, but I had survived its hardest blows. I had protected what mattered most: my dignity, my security, and my capacity for both justice and mercy. The farm was gone, but its lessons remained. Patience through seasons of hardship, perseverance when the work seemed endless, and the knowledge that what you plant today determines what you harvest tomorrow. Thomas and Jessica had planted greed and entitlement, and their harvest had been bitter. I hoped, for their sake and for the sake of their children, that they would plant different seeds in the future. Have you ever had to stand firm against pressure from loved ones? Would you have handled things differently than I did with Thomas and Jessica? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Remember to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might be facing similar family pressures. Thank you for listening to an old farmer's tale of heartbreak and healing. May your own harvests be bountiful and your family bonds be strong.